By now, I'm sure you guys know my views on religion and why I don't necessarily agree with it, especially the Abrahamic faiths and any sort of religion like that. But here's a sensitive issue. Where should we draw the line when it comes to family? And there was once a very interesting debate on this. I'll link to that down below. It was with Richard Dawkins and a bunch of fairly well known skeptics. And I tend to side with them, not because they're skeptical, but because I think that they make a very valid point. If I decide to have children one day, I'm still not sure yet, I probably wouldn't tell them that I was an atheist, at least unless they asked me. Because I think that children should discover this by themselves. And if they don't, and they just decide to remain ignorant about religion and they decide to remain ignorant about theism and atheism, then I think that that is their prerogative. And if my children decided to one day become Christian or one day become a Muslim, I also wouldn't have a problem with that because their beliefs might not necessarily reflect mine, and I shouldn't try and force my beliefs on them. And I would hope that the way I raised my children would be well enough that they would remain good and moral people, despite the fact that I personally think religion can so often be morally reprehensible. But that's from my point of view as an atheist. I can understand from a theistic point of view that if you really do believe in, let's just say, the Abrahamic God, whichever one you want to choose, then you also believe in the concept of an afterlife, specifically one based on belief or disbelief of that particular God. And if that child of yours, let's just say, did not believe in the God you did, and you happen to be right in believing the God that you did, then you will go to whatever heaven that you decide to worship, and they will go to hell. And of course, being the parent that you are, you wouldn't want that to happen. I understand that that's a cause of concern. I really do. But in my opinion, that shouldn't be any excuse for you to force your views on your children. Consider this. You're a Christian married to a Muslim. Let's just say that. The child was indoctrinated into the Muslim faith, and against the will of the other side of the family, you decide to try and convert your child back to being a Christian. So, what if you're wrong? What if it really was Allah that existed and not the God that Christians worship? Then you would be dragging your child down to hell with you because that child would normally have been a Muslim, right? So you see, this can work both ways. You are not 100% sure of your position as being factually true any more than I am as an atheist. But the afterlife isn't the only reason that parents would want to indoctrinate children into their own faith. One other reason is because they feel religion has a lot of good things to teach. And while I'll admit that there are some things that religion has gotten right, like the Golden Rule, which I think is the only good thing really in religion, you don't have to be religious in order to teach that. You don't need to believe in a god or gods in order to be a moral person. And I think that with a lot of my previous videos, I've proven that to be sufficiently true. And while we're on the topic of morality, I want my children to develop a good, strong moral conscience. And how they will do that is by living and learning. So I will guide them along the way like any good parent should, like, okay, don't steal, don't hit other kids, not very nice. But eventually, I want them to realize for themselves, without my intervention, that they shouldn't hit other people and they shouldn't steal. And I want them to develop this conscience not because they feel obligated to be good in order to avoid my punishment that I'll dish out to them if they're bad, but because they want to be good for their own sake. And in the same token, I don't want them to feel obligated to be good just because a god or gods might be watching over them. I want them to be good because being good will serve them well, if you guys see what I mean. One point that's related to that would be that parents think that if they indoctrinate their children, they're teaching them the value of faith. And of all the points, to indoctrinate your children into your particular religion. I think that this is probably the most illogical, because really I see no value in faith whatsoever. I understand teaching your child patience and trust in another person, but that comes with limitations, yes? I would want to teach my child patience and trust, but I also want to teach my child to be logical and rational about it, and not blindly trust in something that they don't even know exists. Now, don't mistake me. I'm not saying you shouldn't teach your children about your religion. I'm saying that you should not indoctrinate your children into religion. You can, by all means, teach your children about your religion, just don't try and pass it off as a fact, because you don't know, and neither does anyone else for that matter. I say, let children decide for themselves. Once they've learned enough about the world, once they've learned enough about at least a few religions and faiths, in order to make a comprehensive decision about what they believe. And that way, it allows for a little more freedom. It allows for a more honest approach to belief. And in all honesty, I think that if you are religious, that this is the way that your God would want people to believe. Not because of threats of hell or bribery from heaven, or because they were indoctrinated into the faith by their parents, but because they discovered on their own that that particular faith happened to be the truth. So, what would I teach my children? Well, I will teach my children all the values that I respect, human values, not necessarily religious ones. I will teach them to be skeptical and open-minded at the same time. I will teach them to view things objectively and fairly and consider for themselves whether or not they think it's right or wrong. And I won't try and convince them that my way of thinking is necessarily the right way to think, because it might not be. And as much as I find religion to be scary, as much as I find it to be dangerous, I would rather my children be happy and make an informed decision for themselves and be safe with that informed decision, rather than make them miserable and force them to my own will. That's just something I can't do to a child. I don't know. Maybe these views of mine might change once I become an adult and have kids of my own, because, well, I'm still a kid. But nevertheless, I hope you guys can give me some feedback. Thanks for watching, and may the truth always be heard. Later.